Right, guys. So the topic for this week is movement models. And we obviously had some questions in this group about like, fuck movement models. Why do we even need them? And I guess the reason why I called the topic for the week movement models was because I wanted to talk about and actually have questions posed to me that have something to do with movement. Because typically speaking, we all do have a different lens at how we see movement. And the entire point of this whole mentoring session thing that is to occur is that I'm not going to teach you how I see movement. In fact, I want to know how you see movement, because mentoring is not telling you what's right or what's wrong. It's giving you a different perspective, and then for you to actually make a calculated decision whether or not you're going to go forwards with the information you received. So it's more or less like, give me your questions. Here's my perspective. Here's how I break it down using the models that I potentially use, and then they might actually be helpful to you. So the first question we had that we'll kind of attack here is Deacon's question. Deacon, if you, instead of us reading this whole thing, do you want to kind of quickly just give us a bit of an explanation as to what your question was posing here?
Yeah, it's probably not like, I guess, movement models as such, because I guess it's like one movement pattern, if we call it that. But like, it's super common you see, and I don't have much experience at all with powerlifting, so I just find it interesting. But it's super common you'll see like people talk about like the squat, right? And from what I understand, and as I said at the start, very not much knowledge. I'm in my first year, but when you see a squat, I believe that it should be the pelvis kind of like just traveling down, right?
Yep.
But then when you see someone, performing like a high level in powerlifting, the pelvis is kind of like hinging as such,
Yep.
like in a low bar. And so my general question was kind of more like, from your knowledge and kind of your experiences, like why would you use that as such instead of like some sort of, I don't know, like an SSB? I mean, obviously if they're a competitive powerlifter, it makes more sense, but other than that, like why would you hinge instead of actually like vertically squatting down? That was kind of my question. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
just something, because you hear like people always talking about different sides of it. And yeah, I'm just interested to see what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
No, of course it does. I appreciate that, man. And I
Yeah.
think whenever someone starts to question whether or not a pelvis should move vertically or horizontally in a squat, my mind instantly goes to, well, if you're going to talk about a vertical translation or a vertical displacement of a pelvis, and they're two terms that you may have heard when people talk about, a squatty squat, for example,
Yeah.
or alternatively a horizontal displacement or translation of a pelvis, we're talking about a Hingey squat. People that use those terms and understand the movement as a squatty squat or a Hingey squat, referring to, and that's why I kind of want to bring up the model, three models actually. They're
Yeah.
referring to compressive strategies or
Yep.
expansive strategies. And these are going to be things that are going to be directly linked with hang on a second, it's going to be on the next page. So the squatty squat is the one where we're looking at, the one that a lot of people assume is the way that the squat needs to look, right? This squatty squat, this perfect pelvis that moves from A to B in a direct vertical line. Matt, how many times does that happen, even when it's not powerlifters?
What was that? Sorry.
How many times do you see a pelvis moving vertically, perfectly, even in non-powerlifters?
Fucking very often. Not very often at all.
Not very often. Yes. Steve, what's your experience with squatty squats, and how many times do you see people do squatty squats?
Oh, fucking non-existent, man. No one knows how to control the center of mass well enough to do so.
Right. It's extremely hard. Right. So because a squatty squat is almost like this perfect idyllic squat pattern that is going through this entire arc that we're going to talk about in a minute, called the limb arc model. And it's extremely hard to go through point A to point B in this perfect fashion, right? There's so many things that influence this thing. And one of the biggest things that influences is what Steve just said, was the center of mass, i.e. pretty much just think of your torso, how that thing kind of places itself as you go from top to bottom, essentially. A Hingey squat, on the other hand, it's like you pretty much said it. Powerlifters do it really, really well, and we'll dig into that a little bit further. Now, before we go on to talking about some of these models, I really just want to take note and make mention of these terms here. These terms are the exact reason why a lot of people don't want to talk about movement models, the reason why it pisses us off sometimes, and you guys can either let me know if you agree or disagree, but it's like we see all this vernacular being used all the fucking time, but I just want to make it clear that they all mean the exact same shit. So on the left-hand side, we've got inhalation, expansion, yielding, absorbing, eccentric, relaxation. They are all terms that are literally pointing to the same fucking thing, all right? On the right-hand side, we have exhalation, compression, overcoming, producing, concentric, propulsion. They are all pointing to the same thing. So through this conversation, we might use different words here, but I just want you to know that whenever you see these words in the future, they're all talking about the exact same strategy. Does anyone have any questions with that one yet?
No, that's epic.
Has everyone seen all these words before? Has anyone not seen these words before? Jake, have you seen them?
When you were talking about expansion compression.
Yep.
Model. I've honestly never heard of it. So.
Right, wild times. If you ever do decide to go down that path, mate, I just want to give you a heads up. There's going to be so many fucking words that you're going to come across. But here, you heard it here first. All these words mean the exact same shit, just on opposite ends. All right. So when we look at when we're talking about, you know, squatty squats or hingey squats, man, it's really easy to start at the place that's going to give us some sort of representation of what the hell is happening out the body for either of those things to be achieved, and which one suits who better and which one is better for what, essentially, right? So the Lee-Mark model is pretty much this thing, this diagram in the center here. Has anyone not seen this before? Except you, Jake, I assume. Deacon, have you seen it?
Yeah, I believe so. Is this like the equivalent of like how you go for internal and external?
That's exactly right, man. So this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
so this is the Lee-Mark model. So if you can see on the left-hand side, we've got top, mid, whole. Now, these are obviously referring to the positions of the squat. Okay, on the right-hand side, we've got expansion. I'm just going to move you guys over just a little bit. Move you guys over here. On the right-hand side, we've got expansion. And during phases of expansion, we're also experiencing coupled motions of external rotation, abduction, and flexion. As we go down towards the mid, and when I say mid, this is probably going to look like a parallel squat, i.e. the finished position of powerlifter's squat. We're going to be in what's called a compressive strategy or an exhalation strategy, and coupled motions in that point in time is going to be internal rotation, adduction, and extension. To get into the hole, i.e. to access that squatty squat, we need to be able to go back into an inhalation strategy and expand again and access ER, abduction, and flexion yet again. Now, when you look at this, you go, fucking hell, I'm confused, right? And all it's saying is that there are 3 distinct phases that we have to travel through to get and effect a squatty squat. Extremely hard to do, right? A squatty squat will go expand, compress, and then expand again and reverse on the way up. Whereas a hingey squat will go expand, compress, and then that will just come back up. So a squatty squat is super hard to achieve, can be achieved. We'll talk about it in a moment how, but this is just a bit of a representation of what's happening from top to bottom in a squat. Okay, so a squatty squat requires all 3, a hingey squat requires 2. So you can obviously imagine that a hingey squat is going to be limitation imposed for a reason. They don't want to travel the extra distance. They don't need to access expansion again because that's just more work for the powerlifter. And Matt is fucking lazy, and so is Justin, and they don't want to do all that extra work. Right? When we look at the Lee-Mark model again, in terms of your question of like, you know, who's it for and who's it going to be better for and all that kind of stuff, right? On the left-hand side, we've got everyone. Now, I've categorized everyone as, we'll just say the Gen Pop, we'll say the F45 enthusiast, we'll say athletes, the BJJ grapplers and all that kind of stuff, people that want and need movement option, all right? And when I say powerlifters, I'm not talking just about powerlifters, just think about strength athletes in general. You can insert there strongman, to a degree, weightlifters, and potentially even like maybe CrossFitters at some point, who knows? Now, for everyone, they would want to actually try and access this entire spectrum of the Lee-Mark model. Can anyone tell me why they would want to do that?
structural balance.
What do you mean by that?
Just because you bias one position doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to move through a full range, because if you overload one position, that's where you start to overload structure.
Right. So what happens, what's the benefit, sorry, should I say here, of someone who can access the entire limb arc here?
Versatility.
So movement option, as in maybe range of motion can potentially increase as a result?
Yeah, absolutely. But then
Yeah.
also too, you can load, obviously, then you could look at, I guess without getting too deep into it, but like, strength curves and all those sorts of things, depending on what the lift is. So then if you have someone that has the availability to go through a full range, they can then load a full range.
Right,
Also-
exactly. So I had a question on group one, actually, like, talking about, should we take, exercises to full range of motion under load as a means to establish some sort of range of motion? And I said, but if someone's stuck in, say, for example, a powerlifter can't actually access that lower portion of the limb arc model over 120 degrees, he can do an RDL to a full range of motion, but he's never actually going to achieve full range of motion. You know what I mean? So is that kind of what you're referring to there, Steve?
Yeah, exactly. But also too, it's just, as we know that if you move down one end of, say, a gradient and you sit there, you're just going to bias that one position.
Yeah.
So then what if you do something like, that's fine to talk about it when you're saying about their sport and what they do competitively, but what about outside of that? Like, that's why you see people who get stuck in, one particular range, or within, say, like powerlifters for the force producers, that's fine. But what do powerlifters do? They go to like pick a bag of concrete up and their back shits the bed. And it's because they've never been in a real low reach position.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But not just that, it's like, people that can access that full spectrum of the limb arc have movement option. They can access the frontal plane better. They can access the transverse plane. And in a general sense, it's like, yo, man, people that can access that full spectrum feel better. They move better. They have more capability of achieving an overhead position, a deep squat, more dorsiflexion. The gait can improve. Their running economy can improve, and all that kind of stuff.
But
Whereas
also,
Yep.
Dennis, are you taking into account, like, say, a bigger person over a skinnier person as well? Because, like, the influence of having more muscle mass is also going to limit the range that you're going to be able to go to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you just want to kind of like go a little bit further on that one, just so a deacon can have a bit more of a understanding of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so like if you've got like a 120 kilo lifter and he's got quads and fucking calves or hammies as well that are fucking huge, you're gonna limit your range that you can actually reach into for a squat anyway. So that's my personal, or even if you're bigger shoulders as well, it's going to limit the amount of range that you can actually reach in overhead and that type of stuff as well. Because the more muscle mass you get, the less range you also get as well. Even though if you are doing mobility work or whatever, you're probably going to limit the range. You're not going to get full range as someone who would be more able to move and function better at a lesser weight.
Yeah, there's definitely circumstances where that would be applicable. But even so, in those cases of people that are quite big, you can still access the entire limb arc if you can reposition their center of mass, which is going to be entirely dependent on their rib cage orientation, right?
Yeah.
So you can get someone who's got extremely large mass, and you can load them anteriorly, for example, and you can actually see them go through and excurse that entire limb arc in a squat, for example. So muscle mass can influence range ability or diversity, but it's really going to be about, like I said, center of mass. Would you agree on that one, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the key, I mean, even though, he's not someone that we would look up to, but like the example I always use is Rich Piana. Like massive synthol, full, like I've never seen someone so big but can literally touch his balls on the floor in the splits. So it's like he can move through a full range regardless of his size and weight.
He can touch the ground with his balls?
Yeah, dead set, man. He used to put videos up where he can like do a full front to back split.
That's wild. That's wild. So going back to the limb arc here, Deacon, so we're looking at a Squatty Squat is pretty much going from all, being able to do all of this stuff, and that is going to be really, really good for people that need movement options. The people that you work with want to actually express a Squatty Squat and be able to do that. Powerlifters and strength athletes, on the other hand, they want to impose limitations on their body so that they don't have to go through the full thing. They don't really care about movement option. You know, a powerlifter doesn't really care about necessarily accessing frontal plane and transverse plane to a degree where they're super competent at it, because the task just does not require it. In fact, the task requires the complete opposite of it, right? So it's not just that powerlifters squat low bar and their squats are hingy, but it's the imposed stress that they place on their body over time, all the fucking time. It then starts to actually shape and change their structure. It starts to change shape. All right. And then that shape change can actually start to inflict whether or not they can actually access this. So, even though I was saying here just before that, you know, even though the structure might be different for a powerlifter, they might be in what's called an extension bias, they might have a lot of muscle mass and what have you, they can still access a full limb arc, essentially, if you were to load them anteriorly and whatever else. But it's like you wouldn't actually get them to do that, because if you were to get them to do that over time and can make them continue doing that, then they might actually lose their potential to remain stiff and compressed, and they might actually get weaker as a result of it. So a Hingey squat is definitely something that's going to be suited to powerlifters, because they don't care about going through the full limb arc, whereas everyone else does. Do you have any questions so far, Deacon?
No, this is actually really good. Really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Another really cool, I guess, another extrapolation of a model that we're taking is going to be the Gait Cycle. The Gait Cycle might not necessarily be a model, but it's going to be a pretty good sort of application that we can use to also look and see how the compression and expansion model exists and where it exists, and how the limb arc model exists as well. And this is all tying together in the next few slides anyway. So if you look at this entire Gait Cycle here, we were talking about it just before, where Steve was saying, like, how is dorsiflexion producing force? And this is kind of what I was referring to there, Steve, where as we're kind of going from plantar into dorsiflexion, that's where the force production is occurring. So in this position right here, you know, as you can see here, is initial contact of the Gait Cycle. We're looking at an expansive sort of strategy. We're absorbing forces here. As we're transitioning to the flat foot, mid stance, and heel lift, this is all compression. This here is all compression, okay? And that's where we're producing the force itself. Then we finish off the gait with the toe off, and that's going to be expansion yet again, and that's going to be absorption. So the Gait Cycle here is serving as a purpose, just to give you an explanation, or sorry, not an explanation, but a representation that when we look at movement, we can look at movement through a few different lenses, and they will help you understand how the body operates, how the body moves, how the body absorbs and produces forces, so that you can make better decisions, essentially, in selecting what sort of squat variation. Why would you give a squatty squat? Why would you want someone doing a squatty squat? Why would you want someone doing a Hingey squat? But another thing to note here is that, remember how we're talking about powerlifters just on this slide? Here, where they're force producers, they don't need to go back to expansion. They just kind of want to live in compression. Then we look at the Gait Cycle, and it's like in the Gait Cycle, where compression exists in the Gait Cycle, it's all force production.
Yep.
So can you see that little marriage there?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So that yeah. So, and that's why you might actually see powerlifter, for example, have a bit of a wobbly, or should I say hobbly sort of gait. Steve, have you worked with any powerlifters that just have a gait that is shocking?
Not a lot. Like, I've worked with a lot of powerlifters, but nah, not through anything like that. But because most of mine's like on table assessment or movement, like I look at their videos and stuff like that. So I haven't actually assessed many through gait, but I'd imagine they all waddle in and they all waddle out. So yeah.
Yeah, they all kind of their gait kind of pretty much just looks like this. It's like they struggle to get their foot really, really far forward, and they struggle to get their foot really far back, because they just struggle to access those positions because they're so fucking compressed and tight, right?
Who needs to walk anyway?
Exactly. You don't need to walk. So basically, Deacon, a squatty squat is going to be really good for those who desire movement options, whereas a Hingey squat is going to be good for those who desire maximal output. All right. So movement option requires us to move through that full spectrum of the limb arc, whereas maximal output only requires us, and it's more desirable that we only live in half of it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So when we look at a Hingey squat, Matt, don't judge or laugh at my squat here. It is only 240, but it is what it is. When we look at a Hingey squat, we're looking at promoting or suggesting maximal output. The Hingey squat itself actually imposes limitations. Deacon, at this stage, do you Do you know what sort of limitation a Hingey squat would impose?
Not in particular.
So it would impose the limitation of us to actually go into the hole and sink deep, i.e. access the squatty part of the squat.
Oh yes, of the last bit of external rotation.
Right. We don't want to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
there. We kind of want to go into the hole, which is going to be like, around that mid limb arc and just
Yeah.
come back up, because that is
Yeah,
where
yeah,
we
yeah.
live, right? If we go any lower, it's extra distance, it's extra work over time. And
Yep.
that is not what a powerlifter wants, right?
Mm.
So that's essentially the biggest limitation that you're trying to impose with a Hingey squat, and that's how it contributes to maximal output. A Hingey squat. Now, when you look at a Hingey squat, it's kind of hard to do a Hingey squat with an SSB or a front squat. You can do it with a high bar squat, depending on how stiff this person is. But we look at a Hingey squat. We also then want to impose another limitation by having a low bar position,
Yep.
right? And that low bar position is inherently going to pose yet another limitation. Because if I was to stand with a low bar squat upright, completely straight, it's likely I'd fall backwards, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So in order for me to actually maintain midfoot pressure, I've got to start with a degree of hip flexion, i.e. a bit of a hinge, so that the bar sits directly over my midfoot, so I'm nice and stable before I start descending, right?
Yep.
I'm doing that by extending the spine. I'm doing that by extending the thoracic part of my spine. Now, when I say extending, some people might be like, oh, but what about the brace? What about the stack? We can talk about that a little bit later, but essentially the extension is going to suggest not an anterior pelvic tilt, but an anterior pelvic orientation, which is going to suggest, which is obviously coming from that hinge motion that we've started the squat in, which is then going to suggest that we're going to limit range of motion, which is going to suggest that we're going to maximize the time spent in internal rotation, which is in turn going to suggest more force production capability.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see how that might make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Does anyone have anything to add on this one?
I think the thing that you clarified about obviously an anterior pelvic orientation versus a tilt is, and the breathing bracing, and this is where a lot of people get caught up, is if you brace, you're creating a portion of movement where you can move into extension. Most people who don't know how to brace and have a shit pelvis are in anterior and then try to go more anterior and then just dump into structure. It's like, so by creating the brace and then being able to have that moment where you can move into the extension anterior tilt, that's why it shouldn't be fucking demonized. But we know that everyone wants to just go keep your pelvis posterior all the fucking time.
I don't know why. It's so counterproductive in a low bar squat, but it is what it is. Deacon, do you have any questions with a Hingey squat here?
No. The only one I do have is, does that mean you'd have to change the actual breathing strategy, for the bracing, or would it be similar?
If it was to be a high bar or a low bar, a Squatty Squat or
Yeah.
Hingey squat?
Correct. Would it be the same thing, obviously, or?
It would be the same. It would be the same mechanism. The same. You'd adopt the brace in the exact same way. It's just that in one of these, in a high bar or a low bar. So the reason I'm saying high bar or low bar is that high bar, you're probably going to have a better opportunity to actually do a Squatty Squat, whereas a low bar, you're not, right? In both these circumstances, you could probably adopt the same strategy of bracing and quote unquote stacking, but a little bit less so in the low bar squat. I think in the low bar squat, you might want to adopt you might want to try go towards a bit of a stack, but you don't. You kind of want to suggest a little bit more thoracic extension, pump handle up sort of thing. Purely to impose further limitations at the hip, so that you don't, so that structure essentially locks you in place when you get to the bottom and you can't actually move any further. The brace itself, the internal pressure mechanism is the same throughout. Did you say something? Sorry.
I think you cut now, bro. Oh, there we go. Sorry, cut out for a second. There we go.
No, did you hear what I just said before?
No, bro, that cut out. I'm so sorry.
Oh no. All right, cool. I'll just summarize
we're good
that.
Now. We're good. Yeah.
I'll
sorry, man.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry, man.
You asked, would you change the breathing strategy? You wouldn't change the breathing strategy. But I kind of just lost my train of thought there then. Do you want to ask you a question again, man?
Yeah, so you're pretty much saying you wouldn't change the breathing strategy, but you'd probably be in a bit more of like this upright chest position because you
when
couldn't get the ribs down.
when you think of changing the breathing strategy, what is it that comes to your mind there? What
Well,
would look different?
No, that's cool. The first thing I was kind of thinking was, would I start to, because from what I understand, my knowledge is like I want to exhale to bring the ribs down, right?
Right.
So then I can get like you're saying, like get this stack over the top, and that's going to allow me to get more air in and more compression, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if I'm in a position where my chest is a bit more up, right, and we've got the pelvis slightly back, is it going to make it harder now to get that same amount of air in or pressure build up?
I mean, if you were to sit there and actually measure which position of the body or the structure is going to be most conducive to getting the most amount of air in, then yeah, the position you're suggesting is going to be the better one.
But it wouldn't matter.
But it wouldn't matter that much. To affect a brace, you don't need that much air.
Okay, yeah, cool.
You know what I mean?
Especially if you're wearing a belt.
Especially if you're wearing a belt. To the stack, like the reason why you'd want to stack is to be able to essentially, get a little bit more or more circumferential pressure. But again, the stack is a little bit hard to achieve in the low bar because the low bar itself is a fucking limitation imposing exercise itself where we might not have to worry so much about it. So,
and a lot of people who actually use low bar as well are restricted in external rotation a lot as well, which forces them to be in this fucking forced out position.
Yeah, okay, for sure.
Yeah, so I think just by default of having the bar in a low bar position and having that slight hinge forward so the bar stays over the midfoot, right? It's like if you were to try to stack in that position, what would happen?
You wouldn't be able to, right? You'd have to bring the pelvis back through. The bar would slide down.
Yeah, you probably could. The bar would fucking roll over your head and it'd knock you out. You know what I mean? Like in worse circumstances, of course. No, so you wouldn't necessarily try to stack per se as you would if you were to try to do a high bar squat and achieve and affect a squatty squat. But the breathing strategy would remain the exact same. You take a breath in, you close your mouth, you breathe out on a closed mouth, boof, off you go.
I got a question for you here while we're on this topic.
Yeah,
have you ever seen the way that Performer Motion teach people to squat super wide, hingy, and it's like really quaddy, but it looks so fucked up? And what's your thought process on the way that you see people squat like that?
Yeah, and they actually cue knees in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes like some of their clients' knees will go in, then out, then in. Again, like fucked. It's
So the reason why Perform Motion, if you guys don't know who they are, they're just they're a powerlifting boutique, I guess, if you will, from Brisbane. The reason why they cue it like that is, again, they're just trying to impose the most amount of limitation and suggest the most amount of compressive strategies and force production strategies. That's what they're trying to do, right? Because they understand the limb arc model, they understand the compression expansion model, and they're just like, okay, well, if we cue knees in, it's like there's no other option there other than force production.
In your opinion on that?
Well, I don't know, man. Have you ever tried to squat and cue yourself knees in?
Bro, every time I follow a few of them and like it's like a cold up here, but
anyway. I did it for the first time a few weeks ago.
But it's so fucked. Like I look at it and I'm like, some of the way that the squat goes, like cool, if it works, but like fuck yeah. No, I can't move my knees in. The body just does what it wants to do.
I mean, there's gonna be equal parts people that are gonna be like, that's super ineffective, that's super inefficient. But at the end of the day, man, it's hard to have a really strong opinion about it because they produce some exceptional athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't even go there. I won't go down that line.
Yeah, that's all good.
Just because I think a lot of them before they were even there, they were already strong. It's like
yeah, fair enough.
It all comes down to the same thing with like what I asked with you. Was like, what do you think about people who are forcing their model all the time that say like, my model's the only way, this is the only way to do things, but like there's so many other ways that people get like the same result.
Yeah. No, I agree. I absolutely do.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that one, Matt.
Yeah.
But so the one here that we're talking about, the Hingey Squat, it's obviously going to be suggesting maximal output because it's imposing so many limitations. Cool. Obviously the next one is going to be a Squatty Squat, and it's going to be one that's going to be suggesting movement options, and you're doing that by removing limitations. Now, all right. So with a Squatty Squat, it's like I said before, it's going to be really hard to affect a Squatty Squat with a low bar position. So you're going to be looking at safety bars, high bar, and the likes. And the idea is obviously we're trying to remove limitations from a structural perspective so that we can actually go through the full excursion of the limb arc model. Okay. So we're trying to minimize extension. We're trying to get the com back, or the center of mass back in space. We're trying to keep neutral ribs. That's what we're talking about, a bit more of a stacked position, so that we can maximize the range of motion, so that we can maximize external rotation ability, so we can go through the entire limb arc. So, Deacon, we used the limb arc, we used the gait cycle, we used expansion and compression. Does this give you so far an idea or an answer to your question?
It gives me a bit of a better idea, yeah. Like what I've kind of got from this so far is, like there's different parts of the limb arc model that you want to go through where maybe say the second part, right, is going to be much better for the force production. But if you actually like say I've just got a Gen Pop client or whatever, a better suggestion would be to get them to access that full range going from ER to IR to ER. And then you kind of showed, this is kind of like my recap from my brain. Then you kind of showed with the gait pattern, and then the gait pattern kind of shows that essentially I think we'd want to be able to get through those things, because like through I think you call it like the toe off and stuff, you're seeing the same things, like similar things. Yeah, where was it? There we are. Yeah, so you got like your expansion again, then you're going through that compression again, which I believe is the in the internal rotation, and then you're back into the expansion again.
Yep.
Yeah. So would that maybe suggest for like going through like that, like you said, like a Squatty Squat would maybe give my Gen Pop clients a good better way to move, and we could potentially help with the gait cycle and things like that.
It'll pretty much help with everything. And I think the biggest thing that'll help is that they might not need to go see Steve for a tune-up, right?
Yep.
Like if you get people doing a Squatty Squat, bro, and they don't rely on anything, and they're not force producers, they're not powerlifters or whatever, it's like you give them a Squatty Squat, they're still going to be able to get super fucking strong, because it isn't like load limiting per se. They're still going to get super strong. They're going to, the structure is going to start to organize itself in a way that's going to be most conducive to being able to access lots of different positions. So Steve made mention before, like, being able to train, say, for example, for hypertrophy circumstance, they want to build muscle. They're able to access different ranges of motion, joint positions, joint angles, so they can actually affect a lengthened or a shortened position appropriately and stuff like that. Alternatively, if they're athletes and they need to kind of rotate, cut, weave, dodge, jump, what have you, they will have the ability to do that, because they won't be necessarily stuck in in that compressive sort of strategy. So the Squatty Squat is definitely the one that you kind of want there. And that's pretty much kind of like why powerlifters in their, quote unquote off season will probably go for like, some front squat options, safety bar squat options, split squats, and high bar squats, just to get a little bit more of that, they call it variability. But I guess just to go through a period of training where the body starts to take a slightly different sort of shape, so that their joints are probably less pissed off, if you know what I mean, right? But obviously in that time, if they were to go boost 1 RM, test right now, let's go, they would not be expressing the same thing. As what they would be if they were in season, right?
I think something worth keeping in mind too is, like, unless you're working with high-end athletes, you could literally tie a sack of fucking potatoes to someone's arm and they'll get big and they'll get stronger purely just because of that. For sure. So it's like, if that's their goal, is to just get bigger and stronger, and they're not someone who's absolutely tapped out, it's like, it doesn't matter what you fucking do. Like, whether you give them a low bar, high bar, whatever, it's like they're still going to get big and strong.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
I've heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Obviously, I think the caveat to that, Steve, I've got on a slide later on, because it's something that exists as part of my, I guess, my internal monologue model, is that structure dictates function, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Yeah, but function overdone can start to change structure. So
What do you do? What do you define as structure there? Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll explain it this way. So the caveat to that would be, Deacon, you could give him a low bar, high bar, make him do a squatty squat, make him do a hingey squat, and not whatever. They're going to be okay for a time being. But if you then start to put them in positions of lots of hinging, lots of hingey squats, low bar squats, and stuff like that, over time, as they keep being exposed to that and they keep getting stronger at that, it's likely that the structure is going to start to change shape. And then the shape that the structure is going to start to represent is going to be more of that compressive shape. Now, this takes fucking time and an effort. It doesn't just like happen in like one training phase. But the caveat, long-term projection speaking, is that if you do that too much and get them too strong, there will be a second order of consequence of the structure potentially changing. And then they might start to, not be so free in movement, sort of thing. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, I think. So when you say structure, though, are you talking like bones, ligaments, like in basically non-voluntary contractile tissues?
Yeah, but I'm also referring to the rib cage and the pelvis.
Yeah, look, I think that you can definitely change the way that they obviously like their motor patterns, coordination, length tension relationships and muscles and that. I don't think you'll ever change the bones. So I think you can push someone so far to one end of a spectrum, but unless they form like a cam or a pincer lesion in that like femoroacetabular joint, I don't think you can change structure per se. Like you're not going to change someone's labrum
sorry,
morphology over time.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do apologize. Yeah, I think we've misunderstood each other entirely. No,
yep.
No, you cannot change yeah, that sort of structure you cannot.
That's
change.
what when I say structure function, yeah, I think structure is like non-contractile involuntary tissue. Yeah.
Okay. Here, let's talk about rib cage and pelvis orientation, i.e., center of mass.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. Like you look at any top level powerlifter. Yeah.
Right. That's
yeah. No, and like body, every single bodybuilder ever, even female bikini, male bodybuilding, whatever, they all carry both. Every single one of them.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I think the second part to your question, Deacon, was then like you made mention of limb proportionality in terms of like femurs and tibias, and should that actually dictate any sort of change, or would you do anything differently? And I guess everyone will have their own different opinion on this, and we'll ask Matt and we'll ask anyone else here that wants to actually chime in on this one. But when it comes to limb proportionality, it's like do you remember the question? I can't remember if it was like
yeah. It was
one squat be better than the other. Oh yeah, cool.
It was in,
so is there a preference for low or high bar depending on I guess limb proportionality? And I think I'd actually like to ask you at first instance, you said you read a study, and then what was your
sorry, it wasn't a study, it was in my it was in a course that I'm doing at the moment.
Sure. And so what did you get out of that one?
So from memory, they were just saying that like depending on the different lengths, so say for the legs, right? Like obviously if the femur and the tibia, depending on the different lengths, they were suggesting that maybe a high bar would be better than doing a low bar squat, depending on the lengths. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along those lines.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyone else just want to chime in for this one real quick? Like, what do you guys think of limb proportionality and how that relates to choosing a high bar or a low bar?
Never really looked at it like that, to be honest with you. Because I haven't had someone's like struggle to low bar before besides one person.
Yep. And what was the struggle there?
It was more the fact that like they just had fucking shit external rotation of the shoulder. So like it just caused them to like really like go into extension.
Yep. Anyone else? Louis, do you have a decision-making process when it comes to limb proportions and squat prescriptions?
Not necessarily, and mainly because nearly everyone I work with, high barring is a preferred option. That being said, I've come across a lot of longer people that I've worked with, and most of the time they've decided to low bar prior because it's been an easier position for them to get into before coming to me. And then through like a decision-making process, it's not been because of their limb length. It's just been because of how they've moved their whole life and they essentially just couldn't control center of mass to get into that position. So it's just more about finding strategies to teach them to control center of mass to actually vertically translate the pelvis.
So that adopted that compressive strategy extension bias.
Yeah.
Right. What about you, Steve? Anything?
I just think that, like, realistically, as we know, like the Hingey squat, it shortens the range of motion. So regardless of what your lengths are, you're still going to shorten the range of motion because you're not going to move through a full range. So regardless of whether you're tall, short, fat, skinny, whatever, it's like, it's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Jake? Is Jake, are you there?
No, one person cut off. They left like a little message popped up on the
that's
screen.
right.
I don't know if you saw that.
He had to go to work. I was going to ask him what sort of what do they see at F45? But no. So basically, my take and my opinion on this one is that I agree with pretty much everyone that said whatever they've said here. Man, if someone's got long femurs and short tibias, short femurs, long tibias, what have you, it doesn't matter. I can still prescribe, and I will prescribe both of them if I need to, depending on the task or the goal that they're trying to achieve. A high bar squat is not better suited to long-limbed or short people, and a low bar isn't suited to either as well, right? So you can prescribe a low or high bar to everyone. You can achieve the exact same outcome, but there might be slight differences in setup and execution, right? So if someone's got so kind of just like nailed it down here, for example, if someone has a skeletal representation that's in a bit more of a extended bias, i.e. pump handle up, ribs out, you know what I mean? Like typical powerlifter sort of representation, then a stance width on both high bar and low bar is probably going to start suggesting wider feet, right?
Yeah.
The bar position is probably going to be a little bit more better if it's low or lower. So you can still give someone a high bar, but the position doesn't. My high bar position might be entirely different to yours, might be entirely different to Steven's, might be entirely different to Matt's, and so have you, right? So it's just these small things, man. So if you give someone and you go, based on your limb proportions, you should be doing a high bar squat. Put a low bar squat on them, man. Put a low bar squat on them, and then just play. Go, hey, move your feet a little bit wider. Maybe try a bit of a hip.
Cool.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
And the same with the high bar squat. So I think the thing that you're getting from everyone else that's here and our experiences is that it's like, no, we don't actually exclude any sort of squat option or variation based on limb proportions. It's just not that clear cut because everyone can actually do everything.
The way I look at it is what muscle I'm targeting and what is the purpose of the exercise, in the sense of, like, most of the time off season, as a powerlifter, high bars to kind of take the pressure off the shoulders, get people in a bit more range, do quads, put your heels up, more quad. Then if you look at a low bar, shorten range, you're trying to do your comp specific lift, that type of stuff. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Does anyone have any more to add to that one?
I guess it all comes down to what is your target reason for what you're programming for? Is it powerlifting? Is it bodybuilding? Same thing as what you were talking about before, Dennis.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you have like a niche and what you're doing, then you can choose the way you look at each individual exercise.
Yep.
Steve, you got any thoughts?
No, well, obviously, like me compared to most people here, like I'm assuming
you're fucking 3
powerlifting background. Yeah, literally, and fucking caffeinated off my head. But no, I think, like, in my setting, I will literally, because to me a squat is a squat, and I don't coach anyone for a particular competition. In that sense, obviously, if I did, it would be like bodybuilding's more my niche. But basically for me, it's like I would give someone a different squat pattern each block. So like every 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, depending on what block length they do. Just because it's like you're still training a squat. The organization of the center of mass is slightly different between whichever form of squat, but they're still getting that, knee flexion, hip flexion moment. And it's like, it depends on the person. So for me, I do that because I just give people a large variety of movement, because then they can do whatever the fuck you ask them to do. But most of the people that come to see me are injured. So it's like, I can use the squat position to then underload or overload certain structures depending upon the injury or whatever. But then I guess too, it's like, I change it because it just gives them more variety.
for those that are injured, Stephen, you can give us a bit more of an experienced one here. Are you predominantly seeking, people who to move back into a representation of the body that would allow them to do a squatty squat?
Sorry, can you frame that again?
So the people that you work with,
Yep.
because
Sorry, man, that just cut out. Sorry.
No, I didn't say anything. I was just thinking.
Oh,
I was like, how do I word this one again? Do you
Yep.
do you, in your experience, it's like, how often do you actually want people doing Hingey squats?
okay. There's two variabilities there. Most of the time, I don't give people the people I see, I don't give them a Hingey squat because most people don't have range, not because they can't access it, but because they're already there. So a lot of people are stuck in IR and they can't access it. So I give them other variations so they're not constantly overloading that position. Okay, because 9 times out of 10 in the clinic, you'll get lower back pain, anterior hip pain. And so that's IR goes with that. But the time I do prescribe low bars is for people that train like fucking pussies. So I'm like, at least I know they're going to get some load on a bar and make some meaningful change, because I know I've seen people at the gym who, like, for some reason, you put a bar on their back, they go hard as fuck. You put them on machines and they fluff about on their phone. So if I know someone doesn't train hard enough but they don't have an injury in that area, I will typically put them on a low bar because that's the one exercise they'll actually go balls to the wall on. So I'll just put as much load on it as possible and let them go.
Yeah.
90% of powerlifters.
Yeah. So Deacon, what that kind of like should demonstrate there again is that a squatty squat is going to be a feel good, a move good, a freedom of movement sort of option. And if you're working with people and have people in front of you that kind of fit that criteria, which should be pretty much everyone other than a strongman or a powerlifter, try to have representations of squatty squats when you are squatting. You know what I mean? Alternatively, if they're powerlifters is a strongman and they're looking for maximal load and that's all they care about, low bar, hinge, off you go. Don't even worry about a fucking safety bar squat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, this is great. Thank you.
Cool. My absolute pleasure. Matt. All right, Matt is on the fucking firing line here. Actually firing like bullets at my way.
I want to know if you knew who I was talking about.
No, but you can actually tell us. So Matt, I'll just kind of read this one out. So certain coaches.
I don't know if I want to go there, but I don't.
We'll absolutely go there, man.
Oh.
They preach about all humans being divided into groups of shapes and forms, which you can then apply certain concepts to their movement patterns. What are your thoughts on this? So just to clarify, man, you're going, hey, there's so many people out there that are just fucking putting people in groups, in categories, in shapes, right?
Yeah, like pretty much just saying, like, so there's a few like big people at the top of the powerlifting, right? And I'm going to straight up say, like, they program in big blocks of programming, and they say individualized programming doesn't exist, like this type of stuff. And then the fact that, like, they've been programming for so long that they categorize certain people into certain groups, and they can just allocate templated programs to these people to progress them forward, pretty much. And I don't know. I wanted to know your opinion on it because I disagree with it massively.
Right. I mean, I need a little bit more information on that one. But like, can you point fingers at who we might be talking about?
0
as a reference point. 0. Yeah. Okay. and what sort of groups or categorizations?
Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love Thomas and all his work and everything he does, but I listen to a lot of podcasts during the day. I listen to all their stuff, everything. Take on a lot of the stuff Thomas says, but I do really disagree with the Thomas like version of like mass production and everybody is the same kind of person, but they're grouped into different levels or whatever, and you can just give them like similar programs.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I ask a question before we get into it, just to put more context around it? I don't know powerlifting, but does whoever this guy is that produces these mass programs, does he produce top tier athletes?
But he does. But Mike,
okay,
I don't even want to go into that part of things because, like, I don't want to sound like someone that's just kind of sour on things or something. But I don't want to.
Yeah, so
like,
we'll just caveat this conversation by I encourage us to talk freely and openly and name names or whatever else, because we're not going to sit here and rag on people and we're not going to rag on their brands.
I'm
but
not.
We're using this as disgustingness, so don't hold back.
Okay, like I'll be open. I just don't like to shit on people. And one of the thing is like it's because he has like a lot of top lifters, right? Don't get me wrong, a lot of strong people, but a lot of the people were already strong before they came to him, or they are people that he's picked out that have been super strong. And of course, you can give anybody a program and they progress. But if you get a bunch of freaks and you just give them any program, they're going to progress forward. I'll use an example is I had Tristan, one of my guys, put 200 kilos of fucking weight like on his total in a year and a half. Freak, just absolutely perfect movement pattern. Wasn't my coaching. He was just a freak. He could have had anybody's programming and done the same thing. But a lot of the stuff that I see that Thomas talks about is that we're all stacked into categories like maybe let's look at it, say beginner, advanced, intermediate, and these level of programs is what you can like kind of work for each individual person. But they don't take into account, like I'm a massive advocate, obviously being someone that comes from mental health side of things, like everybody's a different individual, right? And we all react to stress differently. And I feel like if you're going to stack people in categories, some people are going to get left out because of like someone like me who might get overly stressed and fucking like has ADHD or whatever like that. And there's a lot of stress external to my life, but then you're giving me a lot of workload in this training or whatever. Do you get what I mean? Kind of type thing. So I feel like we're all different individuals and like we respond to things differently. But I think that like the individual programming type side of thing is like you can adjust things to suit an individual person and kind of find the right exercises and things for them rather than just kind of slapping a bunch of, because like if you look at most of Zero's programming, it's just like they don't even give you a specific exercise. They just write row, bicep curl, tricep, and it's not really like, not to say that it doesn't work, but like I don't even know how to explain it. There's not the depth in that type of stuff to me personally. I feel like you could be targeting things more individual and breaking things down to be a little bit more for that individual person. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, like at first I thought, are we talking about categorizations and groups of shapes of people? Like people have this sort of shape or, but I think what you're referring to there is like, you mentioned before, beginner, intermediate, expert or whatever. And I think categorizing
Thomas also talks about like, obviously with his technique as well, I probably didn't add that in there. I was probably talking a bit more about programming, but he also talks about like how he categorizes people into the way they move as well. So like, I feel like there's so much variance in each person. Like I can't tell you a person in my 6 years of training that really squats very similar to each other. Like they do squat, but I wouldn't say they all squat the same. You know what I mean? There's some variance. Like, can you stack people in groups? Do you reckon that like their categories and the way they squat besides that Squatty Squat and Hinge Squat and then kind of in between, like, or same as like with bench, big arch, flat back, like there's always going to be some different variance there.
Yeah. No. Okay. So I think I do like to use expansion and compression as a means of establishing the two opposite ends of how people exist and live in terms of the skeleton, right? But yeah, you're right. In between, people are floating between one and the other. So they're not floating. They're not like kind of hopping between one and the other. But like if someone's like compressed, they don't have to be fully compressed, but they might be erring towards more compressive. Or on the other side, someone might not be fully expanded, but they might be erring towards expansion. So people do live in the middle there. It's very hard to find people that live on the opposite ends of those extremes. Yes. So I think categorizing people is an easy... I'm just trying to think how I'm going to word this. I don't mind using categorizations of, expansion and compression, and compression is going to be predominantly people who are in that extension bias, people who lack ER, right? And
Yeah.
like, you know, and if people fit into that category, that we can actually mass produce a lot of things for those. And then on the converse, we can do the same for people who are not in that sort of skeletal circumstance. Does that kind of make sense? So I think you definitely can categorize people into structure, but it's not going to be specific and it's not going to be super deliberate because everyone is a little bit different.
Yeah, and then like I do feel like I guess like if you look at the business model as well, the mass produced kind of bring strength training to like commercialized. You're kind of like when you mass produce something, you're not looking for the people who fall through the in between the lines type thing as well.
Yeah,
I guess
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So Steve, I think you were were alluding to something before when you had your question of, you know, is this person working with top tier people? And where were you going to go with that?
Well, like Matt kind of answered my question. Like, if you take someone who has good habits and give them a program, like he said, I 100% agree with what he said. They will be good because they have behaviors, they have their own general knowledge, they know how things feel, they probably have better motor control, better pattern awareness, pattern recognition, all that sort of stuff. So, like, you can mass produce. And then, so I wonder though, if this guy maybe preaches that he does that to sell these programs to people who are not top tier athletes. Because he goes, well, this is what my top tier athletes do. This is what you can do. Because as we know, people who are like Gen Pop will respond to fucking anything because it's all stimulus to them.
Right.
He does.
But
he does do that in the sense of like the way he promotes zero. But
yeah.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, if too, like, see, and when I said before, like the reason I asked, does he produce? Okay, so technically to me, if you have someone who was, or like you said, was already strong and you give them a program, that's not production. Can you take someone from first day, you know, first couple of months at the gym and turn them into a top level athlete? That's what I would consider a produce, like a production, because, you know, it's like with all the, I guess, the bodybuilding niche I see, you'll have these girls who are like in their off season, they don't have a coach and they still eat their meals, track their steps, drink their water, do all their shit. And it's like, it doesn't matter what coach they get. It's just it then becomes an objective eye over such a subjective position.
Yeah, because like what I say there is like I can use Justin, who's on this call, as an example. I've had Justin for 2 years as coaching for him, and from where he's came to where he has actually is at this day from last weekend, he's had to work really fucking hard to get there, and then like he's done a lot of work, got there. We've worked through a lot of things together, and he's got there and worked really hard. But then like someone like Tristan did it like he hit a 780 total in sleeves in like fucking 12 months. And it was like, because he just moved so perfectly and just didn't even have to work hard for it. So literally did have to work hard for it, but not like, you know what I mean? Like not the regular person that would, like someone like me has been trying to hit a 720 total for 8 years.
Yeah. So me personally, I don't categorize the people that I work with. I don't put them in any sort of category. The only thing that I do is I assess where did they come from? Where did they come from? What do they do? As a result of that, I could hypothesize. So I won't know, but I can hypothesize the representation of their skeleton, maybe.
Yeah, true.
And via that, I can then go, okay, say they've come from a background where they did play a little bit more sport. They weren't so privy to loading, right? Then I might think, okay, well, this person might need more exposures to SBD, more exposure to load, more time before they start to adopt that compressive sort of skeleton. And then they start to actually realize the goal that they came to me for. On the converse, if someone comes to me and they're already a powerlifter and they're big and they're extended and they have poor range of motion essentially, and they want to go away from that, then I can look at that and be like, okay, now I have a representation of skeleton. Now I can take them away from that. And then I'd start to program, of course, deliberately to kind of get them away from that, maybe take them towards a position of a flexion bias, you know, have them finally for the first time in their fucking life, have a degree of sensory motor competencies. Like, so I don't categorize people, but people, you can put people in categories.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the things that I kind of did here on this slide was do this, right? Because at first, now that you're talking about what you were suggesting, you're talking about programming and these categories of novice, intermediate, and experienced or whatever. I'm just like, yeah, that's like programming. That's like a whole different conversation. I thought at first you were talking about just shapes and people and putting people in shape.
I did mean so obviously the way you move is going to categorize, put you in a category of like what type of program you get. You know what I mean?
So if we just take this one here, it's like, the square is the model and the circle is as the human. So if we put a human inside of a model, it fits. Yeah. We can predict a lot of outcomes just by putting the human inside that model. But as you can see these corners, there's still something that's just not going to give us an answer, right? Alternatively, if we have a human and we put the model inside of a human, again, the human might be able to, might possess capacity to do more than what the model is actually suggesting. So humans can fit inside models and we can have this categorization of shapes, but it's not going to be the clear cut. It's not going to give us all of the fucking answers. There is the degree of, I guess, what you're talking about there, because you really are passionate about individualization that is required.
Yeah, go
ahead.
The thing is too, but I've been on both sides of the spectrum. You know what I mean? I've been on the side that's templated and I've been on the side that's individual.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it worked well for me on the individual side of things, whether, actually I'll rephrase that. So being on the side that is templated worked up to a point until I needed to something more, if that makes sense. So
it doesn't really make sense. Can you just say that one
again? It worked up to a point of years where maybe 2-year mark where I was making no more progress. And then once I got to that 2-year mark, I needed something more individualized for myself because the templated programming wasn't working anymore.
Yeah, but there's so many questions to ask there. It's like, I don't know if you got put into a shape or a category, you probably just didn't get enough exposure to certain qualities of training, right? Yeah, it's does anyone else have anything to say about putting people in categories and shapes? Like Steve, obviously you work in a clinic, Louis, how do you guys conceptualize humans and shapes and categories?
I don't. So that was what I said about in my message about meaning movement models to me don't really mean anything, because how I look at the whole topic, or the whole, I guess, anyone in the clinic, is a gradient. Okay. And you kind of alluded to this before. So for me, there's a gradient of
the expansion and compression gradient. If we just is that kind of where we're alluding to?
Yeah, you could. Yeah. So as a gradient though, I kind of go, you got flexion and you've got extension.
Yep.
Can someone get to full range flexion to full range extension?
Yep.
And then you can do that if you know what each joint does. So supination, pronation, inversion, eversion, abduction, adduction, internal, external. Some people, even though they bias one end, so they may move down that gradient, they still move always in between the two. And then so when you start to look at joints, from my perspective, is you have pressure and volume. Okay, so if you create pressure on one side of a joint, typically you'll have volume on the other side. That's in a healthy joint. Shit joints, you got pressure both sides.
Oh, you love the expansion and pressure model, bro. Look at you.
Yeah. So then what it is though is when you kind of do that sort of thing though, it's people, they need to be able to move through each, but then if you can understand what their sport requires, then you can be okay, how far can I run to this end of the gradient before I have to try and bring them back a little bit?
Yeah.
And it's I know. Exactly. So I know they're going to be a power lifter. I know their hips are going to be in IR. I know that for sure. I know bodybuilders, their shoulders are going to be in IR. I know that. And it's so how far can I let them run? How much lead can I give them before I'm hey, we need to do some shit to bring them back the opposite way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to look at it. But as far as putting someone into a model, you can't, because it's for me, the joints will dictate it, and you have to kind of look at each joint individually, realistically.
Yeah. Louis, do you want to kind of share something that you might have for this? Because yours is just a little bit different. You the hybrid sort of approach, energetics and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely very similar to what you said earlier about it's looking at where the person's come from, because that's potentially going to give you a hypothesis of where on that spectrum of one expansion compression they sit on, in terms of a force producer or a force absorber, and how that's actually going to give that'll help obviously give you your start point of which direction you kind of have to push them towards for their goal. And along with that, you can kind of also fit on top of that is that whole like tensegrity model of like length tension relationships and just overall tension that certain strategies and certain structures promote, and how that also fits into someone's goal. Like, for example, take a powerlifter on one side of the spectrum is a high amount of tension is needed for that sport. Whereas like someone that's maybe in the endurance side of things, we don't necessarily want that much tension to be held. It's not very promoting for what they want to achieve energetically. So both of those fit on that spectrum together. And that's kind of where I look at it. Where's this person come from? Where do they fit in on this spectrum of structure, but also tensegrity, and then which direction do I have to actually push them, and how can I do that through my exercise selection, my loading, my volume, and then my energetic style training or whatever else I want to add on top of that.
Yeah, and like Matt, you work with powerlifters, right? So
Yep.
the people that you work with predominantly are going to be expressive of a particular shape.
Yep.
So
unless they come in and they're a newbie and never lifted before, but
so what would you do?
most of the time I get newbies. So like most of the people come in 1-2 years or never lifted before. So you know what I mean? Like,
so what do you do? Do you expose them to lots of SBD? Do you stiffen them up?
So like most of the time it's just, like I don't fucking smash them with heaps of SBD, but like it's more just like squat, see how much squat frequency and bench and deadlift frequency they can kind of deal with per week. And then once we find out what their maximum recovery volume is kind of push closer to that maximum recovery volume as much as we can before they get overly fatigued and need deloaded.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, like, is this sort of helping you construct more of your thoughts on this topic? So that's the whole point of this, right? It's like I want people to leave these sort of conversations with one of three things. They either leave and they go, okay, cool, maybe the way that I thought about these certain things, I could do a little bit more work on now that I've got someone else's perspective. I can, tidy it up, fine tune it a bit more.
I like it because like I was never brought up like the Tommy. I didn't want to bring up Thomas's name, but I never brought it up because like his name, because I didn't want to talk shit on people. But I feel like sometimes I live in like my own glass circle where like my own thoughts just bounce off it, and I'm around that all the time. So like to bring that up and hear someone else's opinion on it kind of breaks down their other model as well, so that I understand it a bit better.
Sure. So they leave that thing, or they leave going, holy fuck, I was so wrong. I need to change how I'm thinking. Or they leave going, fuck, this guy doesn't know shit, or what I already know was to be true, sort of thing. So as long as you're leaving with one of those three things, I'm happy.
I got like I guess something that could put into perspective of where I think the templated program works, but where it also kind of ends. And I could take the example of, say we do look at these two different sides of the spectrum, being the expansive and the compressive side of the spectrum, or the extended and the flexed. Let's say we have two templated programs that fit towards pushing someone in that direction. The issue with there is it's like you give them that program. When do you stop pushing them in that direction? There's nothing to step in and actually go, oh, we're actually going too far on the compressive exercises, and this dude's hips are getting jacked up, his shoulders are getting jacked up, X, Y, and Z. That's not there as a fail-safe to actually pull back if we're just stuck on that templated program. And that's where the coaching and the individualization comes in. And then you can, you can modulate dosage and all that kind of stuff over time as well.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Matt just left the chat.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. Gee, thanks, Matt. I don't know if we should wait for the guy, but anyway. But this next slide here is like my model. It's like I haven't got a model because models are so fucking tedious. But essentially, it's like my model is I use a bit of understanding from several different models. And the first one I mentioned before to you, Steve, was the first one up here. Structure dictates function, but function overdone can start to change structure. And that's essentially the expansion and compression. That thing has massive influence on how I do things. It's like, if someone comes to me with a structure and then I try to give them all this sort of variation in order to get some sort of variability per se, I might actually start to over time change their structure and lessen their likelihood of being good at what they want to be good at. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely. That's something I was actually. It's funny you say that because I'm about to do I guess a post on it. Is that a lot of people, you see this all the time, and I see this a lot, obviously, with what I do. Is they go, you see them training, and everything is like a regressed, underloaded variation.
Sure.
And they're like, "Oh, I'm doing my rehab," and I'm like, "And how long have you been doing your rehab for?" And it'll be some ridiculous fucking number. And it's just, they're not having a go anymore. And I'm like, do you know what would be better for your shoulder? Just get it fucking strong again. Like, there is a time and a place, absolutely, where you need to regress patterns and underload things to reduce, whether it's overload or anything like that. But I think what a lot of people do is they go, that made my shoulder feel good, so more of it will make my shoulder feel better. But it actually starts to decondition them in a way.
Yeah, exactly. You're on the fucking money, right? And then the next one, of course, is movement is triplanar. So obviously, like the I'm not going to say it's traditional because it's still very, very prevalent. But obviously, Deacon, for example, you'd be very familiar with the frontal, transverse, and sagittal planes, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then what the limb arc model shows us is that, in fact, although these sort of movement options or in those three planes exist and they are helpful for many different reasons, in fact, all movement is triplanar. All movement is actually existing in the transverse plane, right? So it kind of just like, then it starts to help us when we start to dissect, why are the knees coming in during a fucking squat? You know what I mean? We start to understand joint actions and then muscular actions and how things actually operate as a whole system. The next one is there is obviously nothing acts in isolation, and that's obviously something that I kind of pilfer from the Gait Cycle. And what I'm referring to that is the fact that it's like the center of mass is continuously trying to find its way over the base support, and so things are never just there. They're always working in unison with another sort of subsystem of the body, so that you can affect whatever it is that you're doing: walking, lifting, running, dodging, jumping. Right? Do you see what I'm saying there? And then, of course, the last one, there's more tension here is less tension there. And that's obviously from biointegrity. I think, Steve, you made a point before when you're talking about joint. I think you said pressure here is more volume there.
Yep.
Right. So that's so we're on the same page. So it's like, when it comes to movement models, man, movement models is like pretty much what Pat D has done. There's many others. And this is why I think movement models is tricky, and trying to establish your own movement model is super hard. And to a point, I'm just like, what for? Do we need movement models? No. Steve, I fucking agree with you, mate. Fucking right off, bro.
Yeah, literally. I think it's a whole like principles versus methods debate. Yeah. People are trying to create a method to then spread a method to people. But I can see through what you just explained then, and then the way I explain things, it's like principles. So it's like, I know this does this, so then I will think a certain way. But I feel like models per se are like a method rather than a principle. And it's like, well, methods, if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 needs to happen and 3 doesn't work, what the fuck do you do?
You're exactly right. So expansion, compression, that's a model. But the principle is this.
Exactly.
Limb arc model, that's a model. But movement is triplanar is the principle of it. So it's always trying to, so it's always trying to look at the things that we're doing and extrapolate the principles from them, because they're the only things that are actually helpful. Where he gets tricky is, like, for example, Pat Davidson in his book, he quotes movement model is an objective movement-based categorization system. And I'm like, holy shit, right? And then for those who haven't read his book, it's like, this is kind of where it starts. We've all probably heard of taxonomizing things, making things into lists, things that are sequential and make sense. And it's like, I don't know, and I don't think that we need to be doing this. Like, You know, his movement model comprises of these 7 pillars, and each one of them kind of gets broken down. There's only 3 here, of course, and they just keep getting broken down more and more and more. And I think the movement model itself is like, I don't know why it would be helpful, other than to solidify it in your own mind as to this is how I see movement. But that's the thing. It's like, you know, if I'll teach someone my movement model, it's going to be a representation of my experiences, my beliefs, my understanding of all the models and the principles and stuff like that. But it might not fit you. It mightn't fit your fucking reality.
Let me ask you a question then. Let me ask you a question though, right? What do you, from your your perception, right? What would be easier for you, to learn a method or to learn a principle? As far as knowledge goes, what would be easier?
The method.
Exactly. So why do you think people don't want to learn fucking principles? Because you have to understand the full depth and breadth of a topic before you can have a method.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same as, like, you know how people go, all these self-help books, and it's like, self-help books are made to sell as well. It's like, they're trying to help you, but they're made as a product for you to buy, for that person to generate revenue, whatever else. So I think that's where methods are. Because I reckon if you ask Pat Davidson, if you really sat him down and had a conversation and went through it, we would all come to the same fucking principles. But he's trying to sell something where he's like, this is my method. If you know nothing and you read this and you do this, you will somewhat get a result.
Yeah, absolutely. But but what that does, it actually robs you of the opportunity of creating your own system. Because I don't think systems are made to be solved. Do you know what I mean? Like, your system, Steve, is different to mine. We solve problems though, but we're still going to get to the same outcome. You know,
exactly right.
So I'm in full agreement. Like, I think I made fun of it being a debate. It's hard to debate this, bro, because I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, and that's what I think. But you can tell by, I think, the context of even what we're doing today sets that tone. Like, everybody here is giving up their time to come and learn and further expand their knowledge. People who want to learn methods, they're not going to do this shit.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it starts to become it's like a personality trait, because it's the same as like at the gym. Like, you have people who train and they look the same year in, year out. And it's like, yeah, they like the idea of training, but they're not here to actually create a change. Whereas you see someone who progresses day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, they're there for something of a higher level. And I think that's the difference between learning principles and methods. And I think if you boil everybody's method down around this shit, it all comes back to the same principles.
Yeah. And that was like the bewildering thing when I saw Shallow. I thought, fucking hell. Bill Hartman, is that you? Like, Bill, did you put muscle on? Like...
But like, I guess it's the same thing though that Shallow always says though. Yeah. Like, people don't buy that, they buy the person presenting it. So it's like, you know, people might not want to listen to Bill Hartman, but then they're going to listen to Jordan Shallow. And like, he might have a way of articulating it. Yeah, it's the same shit, because you can't really reinvent the human body. There's like principles, a scientific fact that we cannot deny. And so no matter what method you have that believes a certain thing, it's like it all comes back to that original idea. So it's like, if you can't deny that, we're all really doing the same shit then, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Deacon, as an up and coming coach, how do you feel about this conversation?
Yeah, it's it might be a bit above my pay grade, but as for like the
we're not getting paid that much, dude.
I mean, I guess I was probably someone who did think that models were probably necessary to learn. You know, like I was like trying to think like, what models do I need to learn? But yeah, I guess maybe it is more the principle behind them than the actual model itself. You know, if that helps. But yeah,
I mean, I'd always encourage people to, you know, seek out models, seek out to learn models and understand models.
Yep.
But once you're there, you need to only seek out the principle. You're trying to do your hardest, everything you can to find the principle that is underlying and underpinning everything that this model is suggesting, right? And then that's the crux of what you need. Do you know what I mean?
So it's that one little piece, hey, between it all.
I mean, it's not a little piece; it's the biggest.
Yeah,
piece.
it's the biggest bit. Yeah,
it's definitely the biggest piece. Yeah, yeah. So that's pretty much that for that session, boys. I do appreciate it. Steve, obviously this one was the last one. The only thing I had left was obviously problem solving when it comes to models, and we pretty much just agreed on that. You know what I mean? Like it's about having all these models, but trying to find the principles because they're the things that actually help us solve the fucking problems as they arise. Sweet. How are we doing?
Good.
Yeah, that was mad. That was
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is unreal.
No, I appreciate it. Justin, you still there, mate? Or you
Yeah, mate.
Yo,
Yeah, I'm just
fuck.
taking it all in.
No, I appreciate that. Cool. So next week, we'll bit more of a technique session. I'll give you a bit more information on the messenger chat. But other than that, I do appreciate it, boys. Hope you all got something out of it. At least, like I said, one of those three things. You either walk away going, oh yeah, some things I could tidy up. Maybe got a different perspective. That's interesting. Could probably add that or use that. Alternatively, you go, nah, what I was thinking was absolutely right. I'm on the money. I'm more confident myself. Or you go, fuck, he was so wrong. I'm going to message him after this and I'm going to teach him something else. But as long as you got something out of it, I'm happy. Are there any final questions or anything like that? Nothing at all. Crickets.
Nope.
Holy.
No, it's pretty good. To be honest, it's actually pretty cool because I just started learning about the Limark model, and as I said, like pretty new to everything, and it's kind of good to know that maybe I'm somewhat on a right path. So even just knowing that, it's been worth it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Remember, the principle to that one is that everything is triplanar. All movement is triplanar. That is the principle. If you take out another principle that I haven't found, please message me and let me know.
I will.
All right, dudes. Have a great evening, and I guess we'll talk very shortly.